Farhad, CNN's got a piece that Facebook's also looking at maybe not changing their overall policy on ads, but maybe changes to targeting. How much is this conversation evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it's shifting quickly in part because kind of Twitter changed its policy last week, and there's been a lot of outrage over Facebook's policy. It's interesting, kind of Google slipped under the radar here, even though Google is the biggest digital ads company. And, you know, a lot of political spending and just a lot of advertising spending happens at Google. But Google hasn't gotten a lot of attention. This is kind of true of all the, you know, tech scandals. Google is the biggest, but kind of slides by because, you know, they make a lot of utilities that people use, and we don't really, I think, associate them with political ads. But they do, you know, they own YouTube. There's a lot of advertising there. There's a lot of questions about kind of misinformation there. I think this conversation is going to, you know, really come around to Google and to YouTube specifically. And, you know, I think they have run many of the ads that have been kind of people have criticized Facebook for running. So I think that, you know, this is going to be a question for them over the next year as we ramp into the political season.
Bethany, do you give Dorsey credit for setting the goalposts?
In some ways, yes, although I think his statement, which is really beautiful and lovely, that political reach should be earned rather than bought, it's just not the way our system works. So I'd put that out there as sort of a big picture statement. More narrowly, it's interesting. In Washington State, both Google and Facebook actually did ban political ads because the campaign laws are so tight there that they didn't want to run afoul of them. And it actually hasn't worked that well. There's a lot of controversy over whether that made things better or whether it made things worse. So this isn't just about banning ads, it's about how you do it and how you implement it. And I think those are questions that have to be asked before we say, oh, a ban on advertising solves all the problems. It doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, Farhad, we had Ellen Weintraub, the chair of the Federal Election Commission, on our air talking about this earlier this week. And what she basically said is that what Twitter is doing is kind of missing the point. It's not the right, I guess, prescription for the problem. That really what you need to look at is micro-targeting, and that maybe these companies need to basically put, I guess, levels in or insist that anybody that's going to buy political advertising do it in a much broader level so that way more people can see those ads and then debate it. Would that actually fix the situation here? Is that another alternative? And if so, why hasn't it been potentially implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. The real question here is not sort of there's both the content of the ad, but also who it's targeted to and how widely, you know, it's people can figure out what it's saying, what politicians are saying to different constituencies. Facebook has this thing called the ads library where it'll show you all of the ads that a politician is running, but it's, you know, it's for journalists to access. It's not sort of obvious to users of the system what the ads are. I think this question about whether political ads should be allowed, and then if they are allowed, whether they should be targeted, like no one sort of has a good answer for it, particularly because we don't have a good definition of what a political ad is, right? Like, so if Exxon runs a climate change ad, is that a political ad or is that just an Exxon ad? Like those questions, I think nobody, you know, has sort of figured out like where the lines are, and that makes it particularly tricky for, you know, all of these companies.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to separate into two. Let's get to Twitter as well, guys. Two former employees now accused of spying for the Saudis, as the DOJ alleges they used their access at Twitter to gather sensitive and non-public information on dissidents of the Saudi regime. Bethany, I mean, we just talked about whether or not Dorsey did some great thing in setting a goalpost, and it seems like in some ways no one is clean.
Sort of an ironic juxtaposition, right? Well, I think the subtext here in this conversation is the enormous, unprecedented power that these companies wield. And it's a power it's not even clear the government can control it if they wanted to. And it's not clear these companies can control the power they wield, even if they want to. And I think that's really frightening. Add on top of that their interests are not necessarily aligned with the interests of the United States. And so we have something really unprecedented playing out right now, and it's frightening. To me, one of the more interesting parts of this lawsuit was that one of the people who was targeted actually has sued previously, saying that Twitter knew long in advance that he had been targeted and didn't do anything about it. So whether or not, and that's just an allegation, but if this news didn't come as a surprise to Twitter and they knew already that there had been a problem, that just kind of speaks to my earlier point. What can these companies do to control it? Do they even want to, and where do their interests lie?
Farhad, it's one thing if this happens, or when this happens at Twitter, it's bad enough. You imagine if it's happening at Facebook, the level of personal information that some people are posting, if there's spying happening at that level. I mean, is this an argument for end-to-end encryption? Perhaps not for the non-obvious reasons, or maybe the more obvious reasons of Facebook wanting to keep personal information out of the hands of our government or other governments. Maybe Facebook wants to keep this data out of its own hands because you can't trust your own employees with users' personal data. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think it definitely is an argument for end-to-end encryption. I was going to say this is a wake-up call, but it's actually not. I mean, there's been kind of these kinds of instances. I mean, Edward Snowden revealed how various government entities are tapping into big tech data. And ever since then, we've had kind of a parade of stories of, especially kind of internally, right? Like these companies have a lot of controls, or supposedly have a lot of controls from kind of people on the outside getting in to their systems. But on the inside, there's, we don't have a lot of insight into how they police the data, what kind of controls they have about who gets access to it. And I mean, I think this is a problem that Twitter says it's trying to work on, but, it's definitely a problem for all of them. And, we've had numerous instances of employees doing this sort of thing, having access to data they shouldn't have, and it's kind of just not a surprise that governments would hire them for doing this. Governments would recruit them for spying.